Well, certainly the open public record laws apply, and the Attorney General's office is there to ensure that agencies are complying with those requests. So I'll be, one of the things that I believe is most important to our democracy is that the people actually know what's going on behind closed doors. It cuts back on the corruption and makes sure that you know where your money's going. And one of the ways is to make sure that you have access to those records and what's going on behind closed doors. And on the issue of economic development and on the issue of businesses and how the Attorney General's roles interacts with that, look, the Attorney General's office plays an important role in the setting of electrical rates with the PUC and with telephone rates and with cable rates. It also plays an important role in terms of Blue Cross and the fees and the hikes that go there. So I'm going to be an Attorney General who's going to be looking out for the people, for the taxpayers on economic issues, because face it, businesses, the last thing they need too is to have their electricity going up. Never mind the fact that you as individuals don't want to see the extra $400 or $300 going onto your electrical bill. Quickest way to kill businesses, though, especially manufacturing ones, is to have high utility rates and then tack on to the small business owner additional costs for health care. So unlike the current Attorney General and the ones that I think will follow from the other side, I think that they're going to be part of the same old good old boy network. They're going to protect the Blue Crosses. They're going to protect National Grid and the other utilities, and that's not what's good for Rhode Island. Sure, absolutely.
Okay, right here. I got them.
Isn't there a conflict of interest with National Grid having electricity and gas in Rhode Island?
Well, it's a monopoly that's been allowed to them through the legislature, and with that monopoly comes regulation. The problem is you've had an attorney general who has essentially been taking money from the industries, and one of the good examples most recently was his taking money from the cable industry, which was made an ethics complaint. The ethics panel, or actually, I'm sorry, the Board of Elections kicked it to the side. Big surprise there. Another example of your government not watching out for you. But it's a monopoly. It's been, it's allowed by the legislature, and that's going to be a decision for the legislature to deal with. But from my perspective, as Attorney General, I'll be making sure that rate increases are not occurring simply because they're asking for them. They'll have to justify them. Of course, the governor, Kachiri, has already ordered that all agencies do an audit to see whether or not there was any taxpayer money going to Acorn, and to stop it immediately, especially after that followed the circumstances in which they caught Acorn and the young men who were trying to set up a prostitution ring, and Acorn fell for it. So I certainly support the governor's decision in that. One thing that I'm going to be very much concerned about is election fraud. Election fraud robs us of our democracy and of our right to vote. Acorn is an example of the kind of election fraud, whether it's registering voters who don't exist or getting people who aren't supposed to be voting actually voting, many times even people here who are illegally and not residents of the state. And so I will be tough on voter fraud. When somebody comes to me as Attorney General with an incredible accusation of voter fraud in a community, whether it's a municipal election, whether it's a city council, or whether it's statewide, I will go after it, and I will not rest until I'm satisfied that the people's votes have been counted and counted correctly, regardless of whether or not the issue involves a Republican, as I'm running as, or a Democrat or an independent, because the votes for either one of those people are equally as important, and it's a right that we fought too hard for in this country, and too many people have sacrificed life and limb and liberty to do it. Question. It's a real concern, obviously. If you're unaware, the Supreme Court, this was the Irons case, in which we had a state senator who was accused essentially of selling his office and selling his vote, and the legislature, the ethics committee fined Irons, and then as a result of that, he appealed that fine to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, which turned around and said that his actions were protected by the speech and debate clause. So essentially suggesting that you could buy the vote of a legislature as long as you didn't pay for it afterward. That's not a tolerable situation. You know, I support the legislation that you're speaking of, anything to make changes to bring the legislature back under the control of the Ethics Commission, especially in those circumstances. But it further emphasizes the fact that you've got to have an Attorney General who's going to be able to be a watchdog on the very people who are legislating for you. You know, right now, and when you have a legislature dominated by a single party the way it is currently, and you have an Attorney General from that very same party, who is going to be the watchdog for the people of Rhode Island, right? It's a matter of, you're not, very few people are going to call out the person who's been out there raising money for them to be elected Attorney General, going out there and holding the meet and greets to get them elected Attorney General, being the political base to get them elected Attorney General. Someone who's part of that good old boy network, someone who's a part of the party that controls the levers of government in this state, isn't then going to stand out on the steps of the legislature or walk in with the state police and hold them accountable when they betray the public trust. Well, I will do that, because I'm not in the pockets of the people who are in power. I'm not in the pockets of the political insiders, and I owe nothing to the good old boy network that's in place now and running things in this state. About also, when I was at the Attorney General's office, one of the places I was assigned was Washington County. And because of that, the fishing fleet being in Point Judith was very commonly in the courtroom as a result of actions by the Department of Environmental Management. Now, the regulations that are promulgated and the legislation that dictates what the rules and regulations are in Rhode Island are, of course, in place because of the legislature and the elected officials that are put there. However, I will say this, time and time again, I saw horrific stories in which we have this thing called a requirement that you have a landing license in Rhode Island. You know, of course, what that means. And some people have federal landing licenses, and you're required also in circumstances to have Rhode Island landing licenses to bring fish in. It's also required that the person who actually holds the license is actually sitting on the boat when they land the boat. Well, I have seen circumstances in which captains were unable to go out on the boat, so someone else went out on a boat and they didn't have that landing license physically, but yet the boat was fully licensed. And DEM has come in, and because that person on that boat, despite all of everything else being in order, would end up having their catch forfeited, right? Now that doesn't, you hear catch forfeited. You know what that means? That means that the fishermen on the boat don't get paid for however many days or weeks they were out on the boat. It means that those people don't get to, keep the roof over their head. The person who owns the boat is in terrible danger of losing the boat, because I know that's an industry that's constantly, just making the bills. If the catch isn't good, then the boat doesn't go out again, or can't go out again. So as Attorney General, I'm very sensitive to those issues. I will have a very open door and be happy to meet with members of the fishing industry and sit down with them and do what I can to openly discuss changes in regulations and to push the legislature to make those, so we have a fairer situation for an industry that is not only, I call it a legacy industry, but that suggests that maybe the best days are behind us. We need to have that industry have its best days in front of us, because it is critical to Rhode Island, and we are, of course, the ocean state.